and welcome back. My name's Diana. This is my channel Bookish Di, and the cat you see in the background is Leia messing with her brother. Welcome back, and today I am finally going through my 2021 in books. So I know this is the tail end of January, and I had honestly meant to have this video up before now, but this entire month has been a Please Don't Perceive Me month, which has made it really difficult for me to work up the energy to record. So I am trying to get this up last few days of January. We will see how it goes. So I'm going to be breaking down some statistics. Then I'm going to be talking about what my top books of the year were. I will talk briefly about my worst book of the year, just because it is something based on conversations that I've had with some other people that I do feel is worth mentioning. But anyway, let's get into it. So in 2021, I read a total of 80 books. This is actually 5 more than what I had hoped to read. So my goal had been 75, so I beat my goal, even though I was a bit slumpy towards the end of the year. So that was really great. In terms of breakdowns, 9 of those books were rereads. So the other 71 were new to me books. I read 66 adult books, 12 YA books, and 2 middle grade books. And I haven't been really good about keeping statistics for previous years, so I don't know quite how that adult YA middle grade that breakdown is compared to previous years. However, I feel like I did read more adult books this past year, and I think that's just kind of how my interests are changing. I read, in terms of the type of books, I read 2 poetry, 2 comics, and then 76 prose works. In terms of author breakdown, I read 34 out of 80 books by authors of color, so that is 42%, which did slightly beat my goal of reading 40% authors of color this year. I gave 11 5 stars, 16 4.5 stars, 26 4 stars, 19 3.5 stars, 6 3 stars, 1 2.5, and 1 2 star. And then in terms of my sources, I had already owned 18 of those books. I read 15 books that I purchased in 2021. 46 of the books I got from the library, and then 1 book was a gift. And then in terms of genre breakdown, the genre that I read the most this past year was fantasy, which doesn't surprise me. I was doing my Toby Day reread. I was just in the mood for fantasy in general. Second was science fiction with 19. Again, not really a surprise. 13 were romance, which I feel like I read more romance in previous years, but yeah, 13 were romance, 6 were current event politics nonfiction, 4 were mystery crime fiction, 2 general fiction, 2 horror, 2 science books, and then 1 general nonfiction book. So I think, like I said, the top 2 books that I read weren't surprising for me. So those are my statistics. I'm going to try and do some more detailed statistics for 2022 and just kind of do a better job of keeping track of my stats moving forward, because I am interested to see, as I'm in my 30s now, how my reading changes over time. So now that we have the stats out of the way, I am going to talk about my 1 worst book of the year, then I'm going to do my honorable mentions for best books, and then I'm going to go through my best books. And then for my best books, I'm not ranking them. I am just going to go in the order that I read them. I'm really bad about ranking the books that I read, but it's more in terms of talking about my general enjoyment of them. So my worst book of the year for 2021 was A Sweet Mass by J.C. Lee. This is a contemporary romance, and I really did not like this book. So the premise is there's a baker who she had made a special cake for like a 6-year-old that was like super sweet, had so many add-ins, and a restaurant critic had stopped by and he had been accidentally given that by mistake, and they hook up, and then it turns out she reads the review, it's bad, he tries to apologize, it's a whole thing. And so I didn't like this for a number of reasons, but the main one, and this is something that I'm still mad about, is that this is a book that has an accidental pregnancy. This is a book where because of their one night stand, the female lead becomes pregnant, and nowhere in the cover of the book, nowhere in the cover copy of the book is this hinted at. And honestly, this, like, I honestly could have docked this another half star, because I think this is really negligent on the part of the publishers, because there are some people who legitimately don't want to read accidental pregnancy books, and if it isn't conveyed anywhere, it can really come out of nowhere and smack the reader. And yeah, and also the relationship was not super, I didn't really like the relationship. I thought that the relationships that the characters had with people outside their romantic relationships weren't well developed. There's just a whole bunch of reasons I didn't like this book. So this gets the worst book of the year award from me. Moving into my honorable mentions. So these are 3 books that I really, really enjoyed, and maybe in a different year, they might have been in my top books. However, they didn't quite make the cut. So the first book is A Test of Courage by Justina Ireland. This is the first middle grade entry into the Star Wars High Republic Publishing Initiative. So I read this early in the year and I really enjoyed this. So this follows a newly minted Jedi Vernestra Rwoh. It follows Jedi Padawan Imri and Sana Starros, and I think it is Honesty, who want an ambassador's kid, and they are stranded on a deserted planet and have to survive. And I thought this book did a very good job with the stakes. I thought that the characters were fantastic. I really loved Vernestra and Avon. It didn't quite hit 5 stars for me, just because like I didn't quite like Imri as much, and there were like some minor like pacing issues for me. However, this was really, really good. I would highly recommend it if you like Star Wars and are looking for something to scratch that itch. I really like Justina Ireland's writing, and I need to read the other books in the High Republic. But yeah, this one got 4 out of 5 stars. My second honorable mention is Ring Shot by P. Djeli Clark. This is a horror novella, and it follows a group of women who are targeting Ku Kluxes, who are extra-dimensional eldritch beings who who feed off of hate. And they are set to get a resurgence in 1920s Georgia for a showing of Birth of a Nation at Stone Mountain. So honestly, the only reason this didn't get like perfect 5 stars is I'm kind of a wimp when it comes to horror and body horror. And so this was at times a little much for me. However, in terms of pacing, stories, characters, this was absolutely fantastic. And I would highly recommend this, especially if you enjoy TV shows like Lovecraft Country. I really like Clark's writing. I've read some other things by him that I've enjoyed. And this one was another 4.5 stars for me. And then the last honorable mention I have is Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nhi Vo. So I'd initially listened to this on audiobook, and then I ended up getting my own copy just because I wanted my own physical edition of it. So this follows Chi, who is a cleric who is traveling through and collecting stories along with their bird, Absolute Brilliant. And then they come across this old woman, Rabbit, who was the former handmaiden to the recently deceased Empress, and Rabbit tells her story. So this is really good. This was just wonderfully written, beautiful language. It was a little too short for me though, which is why it didn't get quite 5 out of 5 stars, because this is one where I just like, I wanted more so badly. And it is quite short. It's less than, it's like 120 pages. So again, but absolutely wonderful. Highly recommend it. I can't wait for the 3rd novella in this cycle to come out later this year. And I'm really I'm really looking forward to see what Nevo comes up with next. With those honorable mentions out of the way, it's time to get into my top books of 2021. So again, I'm not ranking them, I'm just going in order that I read them. So the first up is The Four Profound Weaves by R.B. Lemberg. This is a fantasy novella, and it is set in Lemberg's Birdverse. So they've written short stories in this universe, but this is the first longer work of fiction that they've done. And so this follows two elder trans folks. One is Wizia, so she has only learned 2 of the 4 profound weaves, and she desperately wants more, but her aunt had committed a taboo, and her aunt was teaching her, and so she hasn't been able to learn more. And then a nameless man who's only recently transitioned, and so he's trying to find out, you know, who is, like, what's his name, what's his identity now, and he's trying to find Wizia's aunt, and they have to go to the city of Kana, they have to go to the city of Ayar to get the rug that the aunt had, the rug of death that the aunt had woven years ago. And so, yeah, I'm doing a bad job of explaining the plot, but I loved this so much. I read this in January, and the fact that I'm still thinking about it, and it's still, you know, something that I'm just like, yeah, that was really good, really speaks to how well written, in my opinion, this novella is. I loved the characters and the exploration of identity, and learning to become yourself. And I also I loved the hopeful note that it ended on. So I read this, I can't remember if I read it before inauguration or after, but I needed a book that had characters who were dealing with a dark time with a tyrant and then coming out on a hopeful side. And it's not that they hopeful in terms of their personal journey. Like, the book ends on a note of hope for both characters, and I think it was something that I really needed at that time. So this was my first 5-star of 2021, but it was not my last. The second book, my second top book of 2021, was Loving Sports When They Don't Love You Back, Dilemmas of the Modern Fan, written by Jessica Luther and Kavitha Davidson. So I had come to this book because I listened to Jessica Luther's podcast, Burn It All Down, which I highly recommend. And she had talked about this book that she was co-writing, and so I picked it up. And this was something, especially throughout the latter half of 2021, that I really needed. So it's basically talking about, what do you do as a sports fan? No matter what the sport is, how do you reconcile your own ethical beliefs compared to what's going on in the sport? So speaking from personal, my own sports fandom, I'm a big women's soccer fan. I had season tickets for the Washington Spirit. I still support the team. However, and this is something I might have talked briefly about in some other videos because it was very present on my mind during the last part of 2021, is it came out that our former coach was an abusive, racist piece of shit, that the owner, or the majority owner, also a piece of shit, and had installed terrible people in the ownership group, and is now refusing to sell to a woman of color who's trying to buy the team and make it better for the players. You have sexual abuse allegations against prominent coaches. You have owners defending them. And it's just getting to the point of, how do I, as a fan, keep supporting the sport when I love it so much and I love the players? But it's clear to me that the league is the league is at a crossroads, and it's just, what is the best course of action here? And so what Davidson and Luther talk about in this book just really resonates for me as someone who is trying to reconcile being a sports fan with the reality of what's going on with it. So they talk about a lot of different things. They talk about, drug use. They talk about domestic violence. They talk about labor issues. They talk about, particularly with football, concussions, and how the leagues have a vested interest in not protecting the players' bodies. So I would say if you like sports at all, this is just a wonderful piece of nonfiction that just kind of gets to the heart of how do we be sports fans. The third book on the list is Winterkeep by Kristen Cashore. This is her fourth book in her Graceling Realms novel, and it follows 4 points of view. The first, Lovisa, is a girl who lives in Winterkeep. Her parents are prominent politicians, and she has discovered a couple of secrets and is trying to unravel them. You have Bitterblue, who is the Queen of Monsey, and she was the narrator of the previous book. And two of her diplomats have gone missing in Winterkeep, and she's trying to figure out what's going on. Gideon, who is her friend and advisor, who we had mostly met in Graceling. So he was kind of a surprise POV for me. And then a creature called the Keeper, who is this massive undersea creature. And all of their storylines intertwine. So I had been hesitant with this book because Cashore is not the first author to come back to a YA series years after the last entry. And I was a little worried about that, and I was really blown away by what this book is. So, the reason I think this book works where other new entries in Long Dormant series don't is that the Graceling Realms books never followed one particular character. Each book had its own point of view, and the ending of Bitterblue had left it open. There wasn't kind of a definitive ending for any of the characters, so I think that worked for it. And I think the other thing that worked is that Cashore had a story that she clearly wanted to tell. So with this book, content warning for parental abuse, kidnapping, forced incarceration, that type of thing. But even though we have, Gideon, Lovisa, or Gideon, Bitterblue, and the Keeper, Lovisa is the heart of this story, and so much of that is her untangling her feelings and her learning to reject the abuse she's received from her parents, and try and work towards a better world, and her becoming her own person and realizing that she's worthy of love. And the ending of this book is just absolutely lovely. Are you really doing that right now, kitten? Yeah? Anyway, I loved this book. If you were hesitant to pick it up, just please do. It's absolutely lovely. I know that Cashore is writing another book in this series focused on Hava's point of view, which based off of this, I'm really excited for. My next top book of 2021 is another nonfiction book. It is Missing from the Village, the story of serial killer Bruce McArthur, the search for justice, and the system that failed Toronto's queer community by Justin Ling. So I normally don't read a lot of serial killer or murder true crime. However, I had made an exception for this book because I had listened to Justin Ling's podcast that he'd done for CBC called The Village, which got its start from the Bruce McArthur case. However, it was more focused on the history of Toronto's Village, which is the queer area, or the queer neighborhood, and looking at its history of being over-policed, how the history of what had happened in that community and that community's interactions with the police and the civic system had really set the ground for what ended up happening with the McArthur case. I had really liked his reporting on that. So, and then one of my friends had read this as well and given it 5 stars. So that made me intrigued by it. Don't bite that. Cats are so much fun. So anyway, despite the title, this book isn't really interested in Bruce McArthur. This book is really focused on the victims, looking at where they came from, and again, looking at the systems that allowed this to happen. This is at its heart a really sad but also furiously angry book of nonfiction that's focused on how systems that are supposed to protect the most marginalized in society inevitably let them down for a variety of reasons. I listened to the audiobook of this and I highly recommend it. Ling does a fantastic job with the narration. And there are just points where you can just tell that he has so much emotion for what he's written. Don't go into this if you're especially if you're queer, if you're feeling kind of emotionally fragile, because this was a tough listen at times, but I think it was really worth it, especially when Ling kind of expands on what happened with, like, not just focusing on the queer community, but how, like, what happened in this instance is kind of emblematic of when you're marginalized in Canada in general. So he talks about the missing and murdered Indigenous woman. He talks about being Black in Canada, like what happens with Black folks in Canada. So it's really good, really powerful book, and I would highly recommend it. The next book on this list is much lighter, and that is Network Effect by Martha Wells. So this is the Murderbot novel that was published in 2020, and I had meant to read it then, didn't read it then, finally read it, and this was just so good. This is Murderbot is living on preservation station and is working with a team of researchers, and stuff happens. Excuse me, and I can't get too far into it just because of spoilers, but this is Murderbot at its best. This is Murderbot saying, I don't care about people. I don't want to have friends. I don't want to form attachments. Oh no, I'm attached. It does a really cool job of world building and bringing in some of the plot threads that have been introduced in the novellas and tying them in. I love the characters, Murderbot is just, I love Murderbot so much. It's I love it. But you also have Amina, who is kind of Murderbot's sidekick in this book. Art shows up. I love Art. Yeah, this was fantastic. I loved it so much. I'm really sad we're not getting more Murderbot this year. I can't wait till we get more adventures of everyone's socially anxious sec unit. Next is a novella, and that is Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers. This is the first book in her new series, Robot and T-Monk, and oh my god, this is so good. So it follows Dex, who is a T-Monk, and they go through a truly relatable quarter-life crisis where they realize that they're not being fulfilled by their job, and they go off to try and find crickets because they think, well, maybe if I find crickets, that will help me find fulfillment. And along the way, they meet a robot named Moscap, who has been sent by the robot. So background, robots have gained sentience, and in accordance with an agreement with the humans, they go their separate ways and form their own society. There hasn't been contact in a very long time. So Moscap meeting Dex is it's a bit of a first contact story, but not really. So this book is really, like I said, just kind of examining a quarter life crisis. Like, what happens when you're no longer fulfilled by work and you've been told, well, you're supposed to work to find fulfillment. What do you do with that? What happens when the thing that you thought you wanted most isn't actually what you want? And how do we, find fulfillment in our lives? And this was it was so gentle, and it felt like a warm hug. And yeah, it was just, I loved it so much. I'm really looking forward to the second novella, and I can't wait to see where the series goes. Next, we have another 2020 release that I meant to read last year and did not, and that is Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thompson. This is a YA fantasy novel, and it follows a young trans brujo named Yadriel, who is trying to prove to his traditional family that he is a brujo, and that he does have the powers associated with being a brujo. To do so, he has to summon a spirit, and he accidentally summons a recently deceased teen at his school named Julian. And so now Yadriel, Julian, and Yadriel's cousin Maritza have to find out what is going on. So this is a book that just it spoke to me on so many different levels. I loved the characters. Yadiel and Julian were fantastic. I loved Maritza. I really enjoyed how Thomas built this Brujex society, and how it's not just drawn from Mexican American traditions that really felt pan Latin America, where there were like different practices or like different traditions with different areas of Latin America. I really just, I don't know, it's hard for me to put into words, but just this, I would have loved to have this book as a teenager. I think this would have been fantastic for me to have like 15 years ago. So yeah, it's hard, like I said, it's hard for me to put into words just like everything that I loved about this. My one minor quibble was the dead mom, but on the grand scale of things, I adored this book. I can't wait to see what Thomas does next. I have his second book, Lost in the Neverwoods, which I haven't read yet. But I'm looking forward to reading that. I'm looking forward to the new release coming out this year, The Sunbearer Trials. So yeah, loved this book. I am a little sad that it didn't get the Lodestar for best YA novel, but it is what it is. The next book on my top books of 2021 is When Sorrows Come by Shauna McGuire. This is the 15th October Day series, and it is Toby Gets Married. So this book is on the list just because of how fulfilled I felt reading this. So the October Day series, book 16 is being published this year. It's been ongoing for over a decade at this point, and this book it was a breather episode for both Toby and the reader because of how much shit has happened and how much is going to happen. I'm very scared for book 16, just like based on the cover copy. Like, shit is going down and I'm so scared for Toby. But this, like I said, this is the breather episode. This, like, we get to see characters that we might not have seen in a really long time. We got Toby getting married. It's just, emotionally, it was everything that I wanted for this book, and that's why it's on that list. It's not something I'd recommend if you haven't read the other books, but this is just like the emotional payoff to everything that's happened, and it was just so lovely. Toby finally got married. Second to last book on this list is Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is a novel in verse, and it follows two sisters, one who lives in New York, one who lives in the Dominican Republic, who aren't aware of each other until their father dies in a plane crash on his way to the Dominican Republic. And they're now dealing with grief, the discovery that their father was keeping secrets from both of them, and discovering their, newfound sister, and like dealing with the fact that they know now that they have a sister, and just adjusting to that. So I think this was published last year as well. I can't remember. Or this was published in 2020 as well. But this is my first Elizabeth Acevedo, and I don't think it will be my last. I listened to this on audiobook, and I loved the dual narration between the two sisters. I liked each of their characters. I liked their growth, as well as them discovering, who they are and dealing with the grief of losing their father. Yeah, this was absolutely lovely. It was so beautifully written. The narrators were fantastic. Yeah, I highly recommend it. It was beautiful, beautiful book. The last book on this list is a book I read in November, and it is The Sum of Us, but What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together by Heather Mcgee. So this is a book looking at how the social and economic impact of racism. So Heather Mcgee, she's trained as an economist. She had done a lot of work in DC, trying to get, social programs, talking about, why there should be investment in these programs. And she discovered that if race was brought, like, for things like, housing or food or schools, like, when the idea is that everything is a zero-sum game, that if BIPOC folks, particularly Black folks, like that is a big issue, like that's the main, Black folks are seen as gaining something, then the idea with zero-sum is then the white people and potentially other people of color will lose, when that's really not the case. And so that's the crux of this book. And I thought that Mcgee did a really good job laying it out. She talks a lot. She talks about, you know, housing. She goes into how the housing crisis in 2008, a lot of it, the buildup was happening with communities of color, in terms of like the subprime mortgages and stuff and the predatory lending practices. And it wasn't until, and because it was happening to these communities of color, particularly Black communities, that no one really paid attention until it got too big and it collapsed in on itself. She also talks about, you know, environmental impacts of racism, but she also talks about what happens when people work together. So she talks about environmental coalitions in the California city of Richmond, and how they work together to try and address some of the environmental issues of having oil refineries located in that city. She presents a really compelling argument, and I thought this was just wonderfully well written. I really liked just how she laid out her arguments, and I'm really looking forward to rereading this and annotating this book. I had initially borrowed it from the library, and it was just, I liked it so much I had to get a physical copy of this book. If you're looking for a book that examines the impact of race and racism on American society, I would highly recommend this book. I thought, like I said, I really liked it. I thought Mcgee did a really good job presenting her arguments and just, yeah. Highly recommend. So that is my 2021 review, my best books, my honorable mentions, my one absolute stinker of a book, as well as my stats. So did you read any of the books that I talked about? If you did, what did you think? Do any of them sound interesting? Please let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoy what you see, please like and subscribe. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk with you later. Bye.